Have you ever felt like you were living slightly out of step with the world around you? Like you understood how things worked on the surface, yet something deeper never quite matched. You could follow the rules, play the role, say the right things, but inwardly, it always felt as if you were observing life from a small distance. Not detached, not superior, just aware. Aware that most people seemed comfortable with things you quietly questioned. Aware that conversations moved on long before you felt finished thinking. Aware that the pace of the world felt too fast for something inside you that needed meaning, not noise. This feeling is subtle but persistent. It doesn't scream for attention. It hums in the background of your life, shaping how you relate, how you think, and how alone you can feel even in a room full of people. According to Carl Jung, this experience is not accidental. Jung believed that some individuals are structured differently at a psychological level. Their consciousness is oriented inward toward reflection, symbolism, and depth, rather than outward toward conformity and collective rhythm. These individuals often grow up feeling that they don't quite fit, not because they reject society, but because society does not reflect the way their inner world works. They sense contradictions where others accept explanations. They feel emotional undercurrents where others hear only words. They notice what is unsaid, unfinished, unresolved. This sensitivity is not learned. It is inherent, and because it is inherent, it often creates quiet confusion early in life. The first sign is that you've always felt different without knowing why. Not dramatically different, just enough to feel separate. As a child, you may have felt older than your age or strangely disconnected from group thinking. You might have enjoyed solitude not because you disliked people, but because being alone felt clearer, less distorted. You notice patterns of behavior, emotional shifts in rooms, changes in tone that others dismissed. Yet you likely learned to keep these observations to yourself. You realized early that speaking from depth often made others uncomfortable. So you adapted. You learned to function. You learned to blend. But you never fully disappeared into the crowd. This creates a specific kind of quiet suffering. You can be socially capable and still feel unseen. You can be competent and still feel misaligned. You may spend years thinking something is wrong with you, when in reality, nothing is wrong. Something is simply rare. Jung believed that rare personality structures are often misunderstood because they do not align easily with collective expectations. They are not built for surface living. They are built for meaning. And until that difference is understood, it often feels like isolation without explanation. This first sign doesn't announce itself as a revelation. It shows up as a lifelong sense of being slightly out of place, and slowly realizing that this difference is not a flaw, but a foundation of who you are. The second sign is not loneliness. It is your relationship with solitude. You may have noticed that being alone does not frighten you the way it seems to frighten others. In fact, solitude often feels like relief, not because you dislike people, but because your inner world finally has space to breathe. When you are alone, your thoughts organize themselves. Your emotions settle into clarity. The constant need to adapt, respond, and perform fade away. This has likely been true for you since early in life. Even as a child, you may have needed time alone to reset, to think, to process what you felt but couldn't yet name. According to Carl Jung, inwardly oriented personalities draw energy from reflection rather than stimulation. They are not antisocial. They are internally active. Their psyche does not go quiet in solitude. It becomes more alive. This is why social environments, especially noisy or emotionally chaotic ones, can feel draining even when nothing is overtly wrong. You are not withdrawing from connection. You are withdrawing from distortion. Yet this is often misunderstood. Others may assume you are distant, aloof, or emotionally closed. In reality, you feel deeply, often more deeply than those around you. But you cannot process depth while constantly managing external input. Solitude allows you to integrate experience rather than fragment under it. This creates another layer of quiet suffering, because the world often interprets your need for space as rejection. You may feel guilty for needing distance. You may force yourself to stay engaged longer than feels natural. Over time, the self-betrayal accumulates as exhaustion. Jung believed that when people ignore their natural psychological rhythm, they lose touch with their vitality. For rare personalities, solitude is not escape. It is regulation. It is where meaning returns. It is where your inner compass recalibrates. You are not alone because you cannot connect. You are alone because connection without depth feels emptier than silence. And learning to honor this truth is one of the first steps toward understanding who you really are. The third sign often becomes clear only later in life. Once you begin to notice patterns in how people respond to you, you may realize that reactions toward you are rarely neutral. People tend to either feel unusually comfortable around you or strangely unsettled, sometimes both at different times. They may open up quickly, telling you things they've never shared before. Or they may keep their distance, misinterpret your intentions, or project qualities onto you that don't quite belong to you. What's confusing is that these reactions seem disconnected from your actual behavior. You're not trying to impress. You're not provoking. You're simply being present. Yet something about you activates others. According to Carl Jung, this happens when a person carries unresolved material in their unconscious. The psyche cannot tolerate inner contradiction indefinitely. What it cannot face within itself, it looks for outside. This process is called projection. When someone encounters a person who is relatively self-contained, reflective, or inwardly coherent, that person becomes a natural surface for projection. Your presence does not distract them from themselves. It reflects them back inward. And many people are not prepared for that. You may have noticed that some people accuse you of being judgmental when you haven't judged them at all. Others may say you are intimidating, distant, or hard to read, even though you feel calm and neutral inside. At the same time, others may idealize you, placing expectations on you that feel heavy or undeserved. They may see you as wise, strong, or emotionally stable, even when you feel uncertain or tired. These extremes are not about who you are. They are about what you represent to the other person's inner world. This creates a strange social dynamic. You become a mirror without choosing to be one. People bring their insecurities, fears, unmet needs, and hidden desires into your presence, and they feel them more strongly there. Not because you amplify them, but because you don't dilute them. You don't immediately reassure. You don't distract. You don't perform emotional labor to smooth over discomfort. Your stillness gives their psyche nowhere to hide. Over time, this can become exhausting. You may start to feel responsible for reactions you don't understand. You may replay conversations in your head, wondering what you did wrong. You may try to soften yourself, explain more, or reduce your presence to make others comfortable. But no matter how much you adjust, the pattern repeats, because the source of the reaction was never your behavior. It was their inner conflict encountering clarity. Jung believed that people who are individuating, becoming more whole and self-aware, often trigger projections precisely because they are less fragmented. They are not perfect, but they are honest. They are not loud, but they are present. This presence highlights what others have not yet integrated. For someone avoiding their own shadow, this can feel like threat. For someone unconsciously seeking growth, it can feel like attraction. Both responses come from the same place. Unconscious recognition. This is why rare personalities often feel misunderstood. You may sense that people are responding to something deeper than words, yet no one names it. Relationships may begin intensely and end abruptly. Connections may feel meaningful but unstable. You may feel seen for qualities you haven't fully claimed and criticized for traits you don't recognize in yourself. All of this creates a quiet tension, the sense of being emotionally involved in dynamics you didn't initiate. Understanding this sign changes everything. You begin to realize that not every reaction is feedback. Not every discomfort is your responsibility. Not every projection needs correction. Your role is not to manage how others experience themselves in your presence. Your task is to remain honest, grounded, and internally aligned. When you stop absorbing projections, they lose power. When you stop explaining yourself, clarity increases. And when you recognize that this pattern is a sign of psychological depth, not social failure, the weight begins to lift. The fourth sign often feels the most difficult to explain because it doesn't operate through logic alone. You sense things before they happen, not as predictions, but as knowing. You feel shifts in people before they speak. You detect tension in a room before conflict appears. You recognize when something is ending long before it collapses. This sensitivity is subtle and quiet, and because it doesn't arrive with proof, you may have learned to doubt it. You may have told yourself you were imagining things, overthinking, or being too cautious. Yet over time, patterns repeat. What you sense turns out to be accurate. What you felt but ignored eventually surfaces. This creates a strange relationship with your own perception, part trust, part hesitation. According to Carl Jung, this ability comes from a psyche that is attuned to the unconscious. While many people rely almost entirely on conscious information, words, actions, facts, some individuals are oriented toward symbolic and emotional signals. They pick up on tone, contradiction, emotional residue, and unspoken intention. This is not supernatural. It is psychological awareness operating below language. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates constantly through sensation, intuition, and image. People who are inwardly oriented receive these signals more clearly because they are not drowned out by noise. This sensitivity often develops early, especially in environments where paying attention was necessary. You may have learned to read people in order to feel safe, to anticipate changes, or to understand emotional climates that were unpredictable. Over time, this awareness became internalized. You no longer consciously scan, you simply know. The problem is that modern culture rarely validates this kind of perception. It values certainty over intuition, evidence over insight. So you may have learned to silence yourself, to wait for confirmation, to distrust what you felt until it became obvious to everyone else. This creates inner tension. You sense something is wrong, but nothing has happened yet. You feel relationships shifting, but no one has said anything. You notice a situation is unsustainable, but it still appears stable on the surface. Living with this awareness can feel isolating. You may feel anxious without a clear reason, restless without knowing why. And when you try to explain what you sense, you may struggle to put into words. This often leads to self-doubt, not because your perception is inaccurate, but because it operates ahead of language. Jung believed that people who live closer to the unconscious often experience time differently. They sense trajectories rather than moments. They feel direction rather than events. This is why you may struggle with environments that demand constant certainty. You are not comfortable pretending things are fine when they are not. You are not at ease ignoring emotional truth just because it hasn't surfaced yet. This makes you appear cautious, serious, or even pessimistic to others. But what you are actually responding to is incongruence, the gap between what is shown and what is real. Over time, this sign can become a burden if it is not understood. You may feel responsible for noticing things others miss. You may feel frustrated when warnings are ignored. You may feel tired of waiting for others to catch up to what you already feel. But this awareness is not meant to make you anxious or hypervigilant. It is meant to guide you inward, to help you choose environments, relationships, and paths that align with what you sense rather than what merely appears stable. When you begin to trust this perception without letting it control you, it becomes one of your greatest strengths. You stop needing external validation for what you feel. You learn to act quietly, to adjust your course without drama, to step away before damage occurs. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom operating ahead of collapse. And understanding this sign helps you see that your sensitivity to what is unspoken is not a flaw. It is a form of psychological intelligence. The fifth sign often shows itself in how you relate to authority, systems, and group thinking. You may notice that you have never been fully comfortable accepting ideas simply because they are popular, official, or widely agreed upon. This does not mean you are rebellious or oppositional. In fact, you may follow rules, respect structure, and function responsibly within systems. But inwardly, something remains alert. You listen carefully, but you do not surrender your judgment. You sense when authority is grounded in truth, and when it is sustained by fear, habit, or unexamined belief. This creates a subtle tension, because you are often surrounded by people who find comfort in consensus, while you find comfort in coherence. According to Carl Jung, individuals with rare personality structures are often uneasy with collective thinking, because they are guided more by inner alignment than by external agreement. Jung believed that when people over-identify with groups, ideologies, or institutions, they lose contact with their individual conscience. For inwardly oriented individuals, this loss feels dangerous. You sense that when people stop thinking for themselves, something essential is sacrificed. This awareness does not make you superior. It makes you cautious. You may feel uneasy in environments where dissent is discouraged, where complexity is reduced to slogans, or where emotional pressure replaces honest reflection. This does not mean you reject authority outright. It means you instinctively look beneath it. You want to know why something is true, not just who said it. You are sensitive to tone, intention, and integrity. When authority feels performative, defensive, or rigid, your body responds before your mind does. You may feel restless, disengaged, or quietly resistant. You may struggle to fully commit to paths that require you to silence your inner voice. This can make certain careers, institutions, or social structures feel heavy, even when they offer security or status. Group dynamics can be especially draining. You may notice that in groups, people often adopt simplified versions of themselves. Nuance disappears. Emotional honesty is replaced by belonging. For you, this feels constricting. You are aware of what is being left unsaid, ignored, or suppressed for the sake of harmony. This awareness can make you feel like an outsider, not because you reject others, but because you cannot abandon your perception. You may find yourself withdrawing, observing, or choosing silence rather than participating in conversations that feel hollow or forced. Over time, this sign can create inner conflict. You may question whether you are being too critical, too serious, or too resistant. You may try to adapt, to care less, to go along. But something in you resists self-betrayal. Jung believed that when individuals ignore their inner authority, they experience psychological fragmentation. For you, inner authority is not about control. It is about alignment. It is a quiet insistence that your life must make sense to you, not just look acceptable to others. Understanding this sign allows you to stop judging yourself for discomfort in certain environments. You begin to see that your unease is not a flaw. It is a signal. It tells you where you cannot fully be yourself, where thinking is outsourced, where integrity is negotiable. As you learn to honor this awareness, you become more selective, not arrogant, but precise. You stop forcing yourself into structures that require self-division. And in doing so, you begin to live with greater internal consistency, even if it means walking a quieter, less conventional path. The sixth sign is one you may not notice immediately, because it rarely announces itself openly. Instead, it appears as subtle tension, unspoken resentment, or quiet hostility that seems to arise without a clear cause. You may sense in the way some people grow distant, dismissive, or defensive around you over time. Conversations change tone. Warmth cools. Support becomes conditional. And yet, when you look honestly at your behavior, you can't point at anything you've done to provoke it. This is often deeply confusing, and many people with rare personalities internalize this reaction, assuming they must be flawed or difficult in ways they can't see. According to Carl Jung, resentment often forms not because of harm, but because of comparison. When someone encounters a person who is becoming more self-aware, inwardly aligned, and less dependent on approval, it activates their own unresolved conflict. Your presence highlights choices they have not made, truths they have postponed, and parts of themselves they have learned to ignore. This does not happen consciously. Most people do not think, "I resent you because you are more integrated." Instead, the feeling emerges as irritation, suspicion, or a vague sense of discomfort. The ego defends itself by turning awareness into threat. You may notice that this resentment increases as you stop explaining yourself, as you stop justifying your boundaries, as you stop shrinking to maintain harmony. You become quieter, clearer, less reactive. And this clarity removes familiar emotional dynamics that others relied on. You no longer absorb their uncertainty. You no longer reassure their doubts. You no longer play roles that made them feel stable. This shift can feel like abandonment to those who depended on your emotional availability. But it is not abandonment. It is differentiation. This is why resentment often appears alongside respect. People may admire you and resist you at the same time. They may seek your presence while subtly undermining it. They may feel drawn to you, but unable to meet you honestly. This contradiction is painful to witness, especially if you value harmony and understanding. But Jung believed that resentment is often the shadow side of admiration. When someone cannot integrate what they admire, They attack instead, not outwardly, but quietly, indirectly. Understanding this sign is liberating. You begin to see that not all distance is loss. Not all hostility is rejection. Some reactions are symptoms of your growth intersecting with someone else's stagnation. You are not responsible for resolving that tension. Your task is to remain grounded, compassionate, and inwardly aligned without retreating into guilt or self-doubt. When you stop personalizing resentment, it loses its power over you. And when you stop trying to fix it, clarity replaces confusion. As these signs come together, something begins to settle inside you. You stop trying to make sense of every reaction. You stop asking why some people pull away. You stop adjusting yourself to fit spaces that require self-erasure. Not because you become cold, but because you become whole. Integration does not make life louder or more dramatic. It makes it quieter and clearer. You begin to understand that your sensitivity, depth, and inward orientation are not obstacles to overcome, but foundations to stand on. You recognize that discomfort is not always something to fix. Sometimes it is information. It tells you where honesty is unwelcome, where awareness feels threatening, where connection depends on performance. Your presence changes when you accept this. You no longer seek approval. You no longer defend your depth. You no longer explain yourself into exhaustion. You simply remain. And that presence carries a quiet authority. Not authority over others. Authority within yourself. You are no longer responsible for how others manage their inner world. You are no longer compelled to regulate discomfort that does not belong to you. You understand something essential now. Not everyone will feel comfortable around you, and that is not a failure. It is the cost of being real in a world that often prefers avoidance. You stop shrinking. You stop hardening. You stop performing. You remain, and those who can meet you do. Those who cannot move away. This is not loss. It is alignment.